Hello, thanks for being in a new video. This time I have a review of the Realme Note 50. Let's get started. This device should not carry the Note name. It is a name that has definitely been used on many brands, but it is normally used on much more powerful devices. In this case, it is an extremely basic device in many of its sections, so let's get to know it in this review to see what it has to offer. Its launch price in Mexico has been 2,999 pesos. That is approximately $165. Although remember that the prices here are not the same as over there. In Mexico, taxes are included. So what do you say you join me to learn all about it? In Mexico, it has an official distribution through Telcel and Mercado Libre. Probably because of the Telcel distribution is that the price has increased. I think it could have been launched at a much tighter price, and with that it would have made more sense. But at this price it is a little hard for me to recommend it. But let's get to know it point by point. On the front, we will find a fairly simple design. In fact, it still integrates a notch in the shape of a drop, so it has a design that we could say does not look so modern. The bottom bezel is also considerably thick, although we could not be so demanding in this price range, but there are other alternatives with a more modern design. Also, it doesn't offer Gorilla Glass or any special protection here on the front. On the right side, the power button with fingerprint reader is placed in addition to the volume buttons. The top frame is completely clean. On the left side, there is the slot to place the microSD card and two nano SIM cards, although if you buy it with Telcel, one of these two trays will be blocked. At the bottom, it will integrate headphone jack, plus the only microphone that integrates, also the USB-C port and the only speaker it has. This device has a thickness of 7.99 millimeters and weighs 186 grams. And in addition to this edition in blue color, it is available in black color, and note that it has a dual finish on this back cover. One area is satin and another area is much more reflective. So this dual finish gives it a certain touch of originality, although having the cameras in this distribution inevitably reminds us of the iPhone design. But something important to highlight as a positive point is that it has the IP54 level of resistance against water and dust, although it means that it will resist simple splashes. Obviously, it does not resist being submerged, but in this price range, almost no device integrates any level of resistance against water. The screen is a good 6.74 inches in size, although the resolution is just HD+, and combining a large screen with a low resolution results in a low pixel density. So in this case, it reaches 260 pixels per inch, which translates into a screen with a low level of detail. Especially in smaller text, you're going to notice the pixels, although in video playback and multimedia content, it may not become as noticeable for a number of users. But definitely in a full 2024 device, it is difficult to accept this resolution. Obviously, it will be an LCD screen, so it is more recommended for personal use, since if you turn the screen, notice how it loses a considerable amount of brightness. Although it is a screen that does have a good enough brightness to be used indoors, perhaps outdoors it falls short. So it also depends on your style of use, whether this screen will be enough for you or not. The minimum brightness also doesn't get considerably low enough for comfortable use in the evenings, although fortunately in the accessibility options it does have an extra dimming option that will help you a lot to lower the brightness further. The screen offers us 90 Hz in its refresh rate, and in this sense it does give us a modern experience since the movements will be much more fluid than on other screens. And note that it includes an eye comfort mode that will have a blue light filter and also allows us to modify the contrast if we want it to be much more intense or softer, although I honestly don't see that much difference talking about the contrast. Where you notice more difference is in the saturation of the colors. So, I don't think you should change a lot of settings on this screen. I think in the default form it looks fine. And interestingly, it also includes some enhancers when playing videos, although this is turned off by default because it will consume more battery if you turn it on. Overall, it is an obviously simple screen, and its weakest point will be its resolution. This device only integrates a speaker at the bottom. It is capable of emitting quite a loud sound. In fact, it also integrates a special mode that goes as far as raising the sound gain. They call it 150% volume. Personally, I find that this mode just boosts the mid and high frequencies, so the sound becomes a bit more annoying in that mode. But definitely, if you are looking for loud volume, yes, you are going to find it in this device, although it doesn't give us a stereo experience. Let's listen to a little test, although remember, it's not the same as listening to it live. But the sound is not only simple at the hardware level but also at the software level because it does not offer us an equalizer or something similar. The only thing it has is the real sound technology, but only when using headphones and without many parameters to modify. The good news is that it does have a headphone jack and also that it supports the LDAC codec, which is a remarkably advanced codec that you usually find in much more expensive devices. So it is curious that in this case you will be able to connect very high-resolution wireless headphones. This device only integrates a microphone, which is very bad for this price range. Normally, much cheaper devices will have only one microphone, but in this price range we can already demand 2 microphones. Let's listen to a test.
Esta es una grabación realizada con el Realme Note 50 y el único micrófono que integra. Si tapamos este micrófono, definitivamente no se va a poder escuchar bien.
For picking up voices, I think it's good enough, but you have to be careful not to cover this microphone because otherwise they will stop listening to you completely. Below you will see a video recorded with this device setting the room system at maximum volume. As all accounts, the device can generate some noticeable distortions when recording in conditions of very high volumes, so it is not recommended if you want to record in concerts or similar scenarios. The front camera is 5 megapixels and f2.22 aperture plus fixed focus, what we would expect from a budget device. In this case, there is no shortcut to quickly open the camera, and that is something that bothers me personally. The front-facing camera is going to give you a smooth photography experience, albeit with the animation turned off. So it's hard to notice when you've already taken the shot, but you can notice it with the preview that updates. In this part, you can activate the beauty mode that has different parameters that you can modify or activate completely to your liking. As you can see, there is also a button to activate color filters that you cannot preview in real time, but you can change them. In addition, in the settings, you can enable quick capture through the palm of your hand and even smile detection. The photos from this front camera will be simple in terms of color. Slightly pale colors are appreciated. The level of detail is simply enough for some publication in social networks, and that's it. But they are not so advanced photographs. Oddly enough though, in this case we were in a light backlit condition. As you notice in the preview, it appears very overexposed, this illuminated area, and in the result we do see a good balance of highlights and shadows. However, in much more intense or aggressive backlit scenarios, it will not be able to recover with as much quality the illuminated area. So, performance is straightforward. Indoor shots also look basic with quite a bit more grain present and little level of detail, but that is to be expected with the resolution this camera offers. So the result, I insist, is straightforward. At night, you need to be in a well-lit area to get a good result. Fortunately, it looks good quality. Obviously, if you zoom in to notice more detail, it will reveal a lot of grain present, but if you don't zoom in, it looks like a good night photograph. Obviously, backlit at night, it won't be able to give you a good result. In night portrait photography, you will also notice that it has a low dynamic range and even more grain will be present throughout the whole picture. So not an attractive result. And the portrait in the days, I think even though it has higher quality in terms of sharpness, it definitely confirms that the device is entry range. It's not able to detect the foreground, although fortunately the blur does it nicely. So if you are not with some object, possibly the result will be more attractive. On the back, we will find the main camera of 25mm with 13 megapixels in its sensor and f2.2 aperture, in addition to autofocus, but the complementary camera is only a supposedly depth camera, but we will see in a moment the results. And finally, the flash is positioned as if it were a camera to make it look a little more modern, but really consider that it only has one camera. And as always, the preview looks a bit delayed. And if you try to take the picture looking through the viewfinder, it's also going to have a significant delay of almost half a second. We made several attempts and it was clear that the capture is slow. And if you hold down the shutter, it has a burst of up to 20 pictures. It takes almost half a second to start though, so it wouldn't be that useful for capturing the exact moment either. If you tap on the screen, you can adjust the exposure and focus, but also remember that this device has an expert mode or manual mode. In this case, it allows us to modify the compensation, the exposure that can go up to a fifth of a second. You can also modify the focus, the ISO, which can go up to 1600, the white balance and other settings such as contrast and saturation, but it does not allow the capture of raw photographs, nor does it include any option to easily scan documents. And to scan QR codes, you need to enter the special option, so it's not so instant, but it does work well. This device does not integrate a high-resolution sensor, so the pictures will always be 13 megapixels. It still looks good enough detail for the price range. Outdoor colors also look accurate enough to me. It won't be a spectacular camera, but in the price range, I think it delivers well. It generates a slight chromatic aberration in some areas, but this is obviously something we can forgive it in this price range. As for the zoom, you should know that this camera is capable of giving you up to 10x of digital zoom. Note that at the 2x setting, it still more or less manages to retain good quality. Subsequently, at 5x, we have a result where the colors are perhaps a bit altered. And at 10x, you start to notice the pixels a bit more, but honestly, it's a good job considering its price range in terms of zoom. Indoors, the device is going to struggle a bit more, so it will appear much more grainy in the darker areas, and therefore we have a low level of detail, although the colors still maintain them with correct saturation. At night, with the automatic mode, we have a regular result, although this is to be expected in the price range. But if you use the night mode, it captures a bit more illumination, and I think the warm tone that was there in real life is well represented in the photograph. Although it still fails to capture much information from the darker areas and the brighter areas are still a bit overexposed. In fact, if there is no light present, the device can suffer quite a bit to be able to define the photos well. Using the night mode, you can get to improve a bit, but it is clear that in these scenarios it will suffer a lot. But with sufficient lighting, I think you could get good pictures even at night. For macro photography, this camera performs well. While you can't get too close to small objects, by zooming in a bit, we'll get a good result. The background blur is nice, the level of detail of these tiny objects is nice too. So even though you don't have a macro camera, you can still take good macro pictures despite not having an ultra-wide camera. With the panoramic mode, you could get this capture with good amplitude. It also maintains a good level of detail. So in this sense, you would not miss the ultra-wide camera so much, since the main camera, as we have already seen, has a good color capture. Although it obviously won't have as much dynamic range, so some areas could also be overexposed in this panorama mode. And in light backlit conditions, note that the preview doesn't look well optimized, but the result can be of good quality as long as it is a not so aggressive backlight. Obviously, you have to test it according to its price, and in this case, the result can be positive. And the captures in movement make them with a good quality. Obviously, having a simple sensor, you can't see as much detail, but the object looks well defined. And finally, for portrait shots, the result is really very bad. Supposedly, this device has a camera to detect depth, but as you can see, the result confirms that this camera is just for show. Since it is not able to keep the foreground in focus, it does not distinguish the difference, and therefore the results are simply through a bit of artificial intelligence. It is therefore not a device that takes good portrait photographs. Video recording will be basic as it allows us to get up to full HD, but it has no stabilization. And this only with the main camera, since with the front camera, you will be limited to HD only. When recording video, you can adjust the focus, exposure, take pictures, pause and resume, but it does not allow you to turn on the flashlight or rotate the front camera without stopping the recording first. Video recording will definitely be very simple and very basic, like almost all devices in this price range. Immediately you realize that it has no stabilization, although fortunately the focus seems to remain sufficiently constant, unlike other devices in the price range. Colors are a bit paler than in the picture, but fortunately they are rescued with good quality. Zoom handling can look a bit jerky due to the phone's settings, though fortunately at maximum range it still retains acceptable quality for the price range. But the fact that it doesn't have stabilization works against it in these types of scenarios. Indoors, curiously manages to handle noise well, so only a little grainy in the darkest areas, but honestly I thought the result would be worse, and in this case maintains good color saturation. Maybe the white balance is not so accurate, but it's okay for the price. In backlit situations, it might have more difficulties to keep a stable focus and exposure, so you might notice more exposure jumps and focus jumps. Therefore, it is advisable to shoot in more favorable lighting situations. Although at night there will definitely be a bit more grain present in all the darker areas and the focus will also suffer more intensely. Still, the video I think is in line with what one would expect in this price range. We couldn't get much more demanding, but it's clearly no surprise to see this kind of results in this price range. I already anticipated you that the device doesn't integrate stabilization, but this is what it would look like when you're walking. Even without walking, you could tell that it had no stabilizer, and so when walking this is even more noticeable, and if you're running it's definitely going to be a disastrous result. It doesn't have any major stabilization mode. The focus, despite being quite stable at the same time, produces that in a little more aggressive movements can stay a little frozen and does not react with the desired speed. This device integrates a fast camera mode, although without stabilization and with an automatic speed adjustment that could still be good for recording people. Although this so-called automatic setting is not good enough for recording landscapes, because if you leave it recording for a long time it is not able to speed it up that much, and in this case it doesn't have slow motion. The front camera integrates HD recording only, disappointing even though it is a cheap device. I think that in the 2024 we should ask for at least full HD. Evidently it has fixed focus, it will not have stabilization, and its backlight performance will be poor. So this device is not highly recommended if you wanted to record good content with this front camera. There are other alternatives with better recording quality, even in this price range. Indoors, you will notice that even more detail is lost. More noise appears all around the video and the colors look very inaccurate. And at night, it's exactly the same. We're going to have a greater amount of noise that takes away a lot of definition from the face, so it's not recommended at all to record with the front camera of this device. This device arrives with Android 13 out of the box and supposedly realme UI, but it's a special edition that basically looks like pure Android, just with a few apps added and the home screen modified, but the rest of the system looks completely like pure Android. It's actually an experience that I personally dislike quite a bit. It looks like a very generic device. It doesn't look like a realme device at the software level. It also arrives outdated from the factory, and even though we are promised 2 years of software updates with 3 years of security patches, it is something that can run out very quickly by the very fact of coming out of date. In addition, at the software level, there are not many additional features. It basically has the same as any other Android device has. Although realme from several devices is starting to integrate this that they call mini capsule, which are simply animations, in this case taking advantage of the notch so that, for example, show when you start charging your device, but there are very few tools that are going to take advantage of it. For example, the timer you see does not appear in that section, the voice recorder does not appear in that section either. So basically it's just a nice animation when you charge the phone. It also brings another option that Chinese manufacturers like a lot, which is the wallpaper carousel function on the lock screen. That is, they will change the background every time you try to unlock your phone. Sometimes they show somewhat strange images, so personally it is something that I do not like at all, but it is an option that is not in pure Android, and here, yes, there will also be some gestures available as to activate the device with different actions, but it's the traditional. And in this case, the one-handed mode you can use only if you have gesture navigation enabled, or you can create a shortcut so that you have a floating button, and when you press it, you can activate this mode that only resets on the vertical axis. As you can see, the device is very simple at the software level and evidently integrates an optical engine on the Z-axis that gives you very simple feedback when interacting with various elements of the system. This device integrates a side fingerprint reader capable of having up to 5 records, so it complies well. As you can see, the unlocking is quite fast and agile, but it does not integrate additional tools in this reader such as gestures or quick shortcuts. What it does integrate is a fairly simple facial unlock, only in 2 dimensions, which is not recommended if your priority is security. But for a comfortable experience, it will also integrate Google Extended Unlock, so you can register some locations or devices to keep this phone unlocked. It also integrates Google's password manager, which in this case does come configured to first verify through your fingerprint before autofilling forms, but it seems to have a less than optimal performance. It also integrates the option to clone some applications so you can use two accounts on the same device, but it does not integrate a child mode, nor does it integrate this manufacturer's own VPN. It also does not have the option to lock applications or secure folders except for the tools that Google offers you through Google Photos. As you can see, the experience is quite simple, although fortunately in this case it does not rely solely on Google Play Protect, but on the Security Center application. You're going to see that it also features a scan in collaboration with Avast, which is a pretty reputable company when it comes to security. And therefore, you can be a little more at ease to avoid malware. The battery is 5000 milliamps, but it doesn't really give us such a high performance in this regard. For example, in my test using the drainer in the foreground, it came in at 3 hours and 52 minutes. Close to 4 hours, but definitely falls short of what we'd like to see in a device with a battery of this capacity. And using the background drainer and YouTube in the foreground, it went up just a few minutes, so it reached 4 hours with 8 minutes, confirming that the device does not have such an intelligent or advanced management of applications running in the background. Although curiously in this case, it does bring a normal power saving mode that you could take advantage of on a day-to-day basis, and also an ultra saving mode. This is generally not present in pure Android, so at least in this sense they have added some software options, but it only supports 10-watt charging, so it's a considerably slow charge. In 50 minutes it barely recovered 10% of the battery, in 30 minutes it recovered 19%, and the full charge took 184 minutes. It's an exaggeratedly slow charge that definitely disappoints a lot for being realme, which is a brand that is noted for fast charging, but on this device being the cheapest, they sacrificed a ton. And if you were planning to leave it charging overnight, that will be bad news because it will cause the battery to degrade much faster since it has no wireless charging system, no charging lock or anything like that. So the battery experience is definitely not good. In terms of connectivity, it will only support Quad G networks. It's obviously not an expensive device, so we can accept that. It obviously won't support eSIM either, and unlike other realme devices, it also doesn't allow you to select which apps can use your mobile data and which apps will only be able to connect to the internet via Wi-Fi. So the experience is quite limited in the sense of your mobile data connection. It also supports Wi-Fi 5, giving an expected download speed in this price range. It won't be anything spectacular, but in this respect we can't get too picky. However, it also won't integrate NFC and it doesn't have FM radio, which is possibly one of the most important absences, taking into account that practically all devices in this price range integrate FM radio. And with regard to screen projection, it will obviously only be in mirrored format, but fortunately you can select screens in addition to Chromecast. It will also integrate Android Auto, but there is one point where the device can really stand out in this price range, and that is in the sensors, as it does integrate accelerometer, also geomagnetic field sensor, orientation sensor, even gyroscope, which is a rare sensor in this price range. And it also has a physical proximity sensor, although it doesn't seem to work as smoothly as I would like. The response is a bit shaky, but I think it does have a good number of sensors that make this device potentially stand out in this regard. The realme ecosystem is currently growing and has a good number of devices. However, with this device coming with a trimmed down version of its operating system, we won't see the same level of interaction. So specifically on this device, the ecosystem is limited to what Google can offer you through technologies like Quick Share or Google Fast Payer. So it's a device that looks very dependent on Google because of the operating system that it has. In fact, also the cloud storage and control of home devices will depend on applications like Google Drive or Google Home. That's why I repeat that it is a very simple device in this aspect. Hopefully Realme will put a little more effort into their entry series devices. Let's finally talk about the performance. This device integrates the Unisoc Tiger T612 processor, a simple processor wherever you want to see it. In addition, it integrates 4 GB of physical RAM and they give you another 4 GB of virtual RAM. Possibly that's the trick with which Realme heavily advertises this device as having 8 GB of RAM, although it's a feature you can turn on or off as you like. But let's test it as having 8 GB of RAM to see if it's true what Realme claims. In addition, it also comes with about 128 GB of storage and you can fit it with a micro SD up to 2 TB. As you can see, it took 6.3 seconds or so on average to open each application, showing that the processor really does have a lot of weakness. And we're already seeing application restarts, so even though it says it may have 8 GB of RAM combining physical with virtual, in reality the virtual RAM doesn't seem to be working. It's obvious as you're seeing that the device won't manage to have more than 4 or 5 apps open at most, because otherwise it's going to be constantly rebooting and your experience will become very slow. So if you as a user are one of those who want to have a lot of things open at the same time without the device getting slow, this option is not for you. This option is for people who will be looking to simply have WhatsApp and that's it, because otherwise the performance is going to be greatly affected. In fact, the recommended thing to do on this device would be to install applications in light editions or Go editions, which are much simpler versions, because if not, watch what happens. Next, we are going to test how long it takes to export several clips together with a total duration of 1 minute, all in full HD, recorded with this device, to also see if the storage has good speed in conjunction with the RAM and processor. It took about 49 seconds, which for a device of this price is honestly not too bad. But obviously in this case I only have that one application open. So, if you want to have a good performance, you do need to have very few things open at the same time. At the gaming level, you will also not find some additional tools as we usually find in other Realme devices, so I say that this one disappoints in several ways and does not look like a Realme device. In Call of Duty, this device gives us by default the low graphic quality at a medium frame rate, but curiously the medium quality at a high rate is available, although obviously many effects are disabled. And with this configuration, the performance was honestly good. It had very good stability, although it did have a noticeable low peak reaching up to 3 frames per second, but it was a brief moment. The truth is that most of the time the device maintains a good performance, and compared to what in previous years we saw in this price range, it is noticeable here that there is an important evolution, so the performance in this game was correct. Obviously, remember to have any other application closed so you can maintain better performance. But the curious thing is that even recording the screen, we did not notice that the device had a significant drop in performance, plus the heating remained in a correct area. In the Legends game, we changed the automatic setting to a low setting at 60 frames per second. And the result was good, although in the first stage it started at 60 frames per second stable, but then it seems that due to warming up or something similar, it was much more limited, so it was fluctuating quite close to 30 frames per second, but it never dropped below 33, so I think the performance is still positive considering the price range. In the case of the SpongeBob game, by default it offers us medium resolution and quality, but to put a test according to the price we set the resolution and quality low, disabling the smoothing but keeping 60 frames per second. And although it does not have much stability, fortunately the game still feels fluid. That is, if it is fluctuating in its frames per second, it does not maintain a completely straight line, but the lowest was 23 frames per second, and you can still maintain a good experience playing, so the truth is that to play is a performance that is giving us a good experience. In fact, Realme always tends to stand out for a good performance in games, and honestly, having seen what we had in applications and other sections, I thought this device was going to behave worse in games, but in this case, I think it does give us a performance that could be salvageable. And finally, we played Asphalt 9. In this case, enabling the 60 frames per second view and keeping the default graphics quality setting. And the result again was very similar to the last test, that is, there are several fluctuations, but it does not go down very significantly. In fact, its lowest peak was a mere 25 frames per second, so it maintains a good experience. This is as long as the game is well adapted, as is the case with Asphalt 9 with graphics selected at a good level for this processor. So if your priority is to play games and you are not too interested in having very high quality graphics with many effects, I think this option could be interesting. As a conclusion, it is a device that gets to make a lot of sacrifices, and I really only liked its performance in games. In fact, that was my surprise, because in all other features, it is a very basic device. I would recommend you to save a little and buy a more advanced one, or look for a model of past years that has lowered its price, because at the moment I could not recommend this device too much. For now, this has been all for this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, you know that you can indicate it, and see you next time.